Okay, this is the video for mouth number one. So with the mouth, we're going to talk about some of the different features of the mouth, including the philtrum, the vermilion border, um, the vermilion uh, actual red, pinkish portion of the lips. But to start the very first mouth, we want to look at the shape of the upper lip. So typically, the upper lip is just slightly thinner than the bottom lip. So we want to keep that in mind as we're drawing. So the shape of this upper lip for mouth number one, I always tend to start with what is typically called the Cupid's bow. And the reason it is given that name is because it looks like a bow on its side. So for this particular shape, what we're seeing is it dips down and then it curves back up. And probably the most difficult part for the mouth is trying to get it symmetrical. So, um, depending on the mouth that you're drawing, it's not always going to be 100% symmetrical, but it's going to be pretty close. So you really have to look at the shape that you're working with. So if it helps, what you can do is kind of follow a similar technique that we worked with in eye number two, and that's just make a box. So if you work with a geometric shape, that can kind of help you get the overall shape of that mouth. Now, when doing this, you want to look at the overall shape of the mouth. If I were to make this box really thin and long, that doesn't really fit the shape of the mouth that we're working with. So I need to make the bottom just a little bit bigger. And then, like with the eye, if you need to, you can split that rectangular box in two. And that'll kind of give you a guide point where the middle point of that Cupid's bow would be. So once you have the overall shape made, and what we're going to do, we're going to finish out the ends of the mouth. And what happens with this mouth is it curves down. And for the bottom part of the upper lip, what we are seeing with the lips, and typically what we see is it curves up right here. And so this curve is going to mark the bottom part of the upper lip. So we're going to look at this curve. And so it falls across kind of like this. And then it's going to drop down. So really just work with the shape in order to get that curve that you're needing and to really balance it out. And for the edges of this particular mouth, this has kind of a curve right here. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to see just based on lighting. So the corners of this particular mouth, the lighting and shadows are a bit darker. Now, for the bottom lip, we have this marked right here. And all the bottom lip is, it's a pretty simple curve, kind of mimics like a smiley face. And then it's really just going to curve and meet right here. So the overall mouth shape is pretty simple. There's not a lot of, you're not really drawing a lot of lines. A lot of what you're doing is tortillion work and working with your values. Now, We do have some lines that we're going to go ahead and put in, um, really just so that it shapes the mouth correctly. Um, but we're going to do most of these after we work with our values and our tortillions. Now, what is important to know is that in this area, the bottom lip, what happens is the lines and the direction that we use our tortillion, it curves down like this. On this side, it's going to curve like that. Upper lip curves up. Upper lip on this side curves up like this. And if you look at the photo, you can see the creases in the lips, and that really serves as kind of a guide for how you're going to put your values down. So first thing I'm going to do, using my tortillion, I'm just going to start by adding value and just make sure that you curve these values with your tortillions. And I can go ahead and remove that kind of boundary box that we're working with. So, and then I'm going to do the same with my tortillion for the bottom lip. So I want to make sure that these curve. So really what I'm doing right now, I'm just kind of getting a base down for my values on the lips. Right there, you can kind of start to see some texture with the tortillion. And now we're going to start working with the values, and these are really going to help shape the mouth. So I have my 6B pencil, and I'm going to work in the corners of the mouth to really emphasize these shadows. And so with the mouth, having these hatch lines that I'm putting down, these are pretty important because it emphasizes those ridges and textures in the lips. Now, once we kind of get to this point where we have this curve that curves up, this is where we're not going to press as hard. So the lines are still going to curve, but I'm not going to put as much pressure. There are some like darker areas, but they're a little more sporadic. And it's okay to like kind of skip some areas too. So like in here, we're getting some of those lighter values. Once you get to like the middle portion of the mouth, these lines they become a little more vertical, so they're not going to curve nearly as much. So then they start to curve outward a little bit more. And I'm going to push these values even darker in the corners of the mouth. And because we have all this texture on the lips, we don't really want to lose that by blending it all out with my tortillion. So that's why I used the tortillion first, and then I went on top with my hatch lines. Now, underneath the bottom lip, we do have a darker shadow, which is a little deceiving. It actually makes the upper lip look thicker than it really is. So with the shadow, it is going to be pretty dark. And you just want to make sure that you're still working in the correct direction. Now, what happens with the bottom lip is that the bottom lip sticks out. So the bottom lip typically is going to look lighter or have more highlights on it because it does stick out. And notice where some of these lines are. So some of these lines are darker and they fall down a little bit further. But main thing, just make sure that these curve. And then we do have these brighter values like right here, and there's some right here and a little bit right here. And then there's kind of some middle tone values underneath those. So I'm actually going to start back at the bottom and work my way up. So I'm not going to press as hard, but I still want to be aware that my lines are curving. So as you get closer to the edge of the mouth, these lines are going to have a more dramatic curve. The curve is going to be sharper. And then there is a shadow that kind of fades out a little in this corner. So I'm just going to bring these down to cut out some of those highlights. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I do have a lot of these bright spots left. So I need to make those kind of blend in a little bit better. So I'm just using my pencil and going over some of those dark values again and allowing some of those lighter lines to kind of trail off into these highlights. Now, because there is this dark shadow um, on the bottom lip, I want to soften that up just a little bit. So I can use my tortillon, and I don't want to lose a lot of the texture that I've created. So I'm just going to kind of go along where the upper lip and bottom lip are meeting. And I'm still going in that direction. So on this side, I'm going in this direction. This side, I'm going in this direction. And then I may go over the bottom portion of the upper lip also. And I think I'm going to soften a little bit of the corners of the mouth. Again, I'm not pressing super hard because I don't want to lose some of those hatch lines that I'd created. And then I may go along this bottom portion a little bit. Still working in the direction of those marks. And I want to lessen this highlight just a little bit. So with my tortillon, and there's a little bit of pencil left on it, I'm just gently going over some of those bright highlights. I'm not pressing very hard because I don't want to lose the texture. Now, what we can also do, we can work with the values underneath the lip and the values around the philtrum, where the two lines above the lips stick out a bit. So with the value underneath the bottom lip, this is going to be pretty dark. There's usually a shadow underneath this portion. So I'm just using my 6B pencil, and then I'll finish it out with the tortillon. It's a little bit of a highlight right here, so I'm just going to skip that, and then I'll use the other edge of my tortillon and just lightly go over it to give it a little value. And then for the philtrum, or the area above the upper lip, uh, typically the philtrum, or in between the philtrum, this area is going to be darker because it is essentially a recess area. So what happens is with the mouth, and think about your own mouth, it curves up and it hits the philtrum and then it curves down. Now there is a little bit of a highlight above the upper lip. So for right now, I'm just going to leave a little bit of a lighter area. And then with this area that would be underneath the nose and right above the upper lip, work with your tortillons this way. So it's almost like a V type shape. And then this is just going to fade out a little bit, typically highlight where that philtrum is because that sticks out. And then a little bit of value right here. So think about the direction that we're putting the tortillon marks. So right here, they're going to curve like this, and then this is going to curve like that. Now there's a bit of a highlight right here. It's not going to be white. I just accidentally covered up a little too much. So I want to turn this into a light gray. So I'm going to take my tortillon and just very lightly go over this spot. So it takes away the white, but it leaves a little bit of a grayish value. And then for this particular mouth, we can see that there is a little bit of stubble. So, that's pretty easy. It's just hatching. And even with these, or I'm sorry, stippling. So even with these stippling marks, work in the same direction. So most of the stubble is seen in this recess area uh, between the philtrum. And it kind of fades out as it starts to slope down on the upper part of the mouth. It starts to kind of disappear. And I can even take my tortillon and stipple on top of those marks if they are too sharp and in focus. And then what I'll also do, and what I can use my tortillon for, is we have this vermilion border. So what the vermilion is, it's the coloring in the lips. The vermilion border is simply the area that the lips meet the skin. And so this is pretty sharp and defined. It's really not like that. So using my tortillon, I want to keep the direction the same that I put these hatch marks down, but I'm just softening that edge so the hard defined line isn't there anymore. And so that way it looks like it blends in a little more smoothly to the rest of the mouth. Okay, so that's how we approach mouth number one. We will work on mouth number two in another video. I'm just going to touch up some of these ridges in the mouth first. So, main thing, just be aware of the pressure that you're applying when you are using your pencil and the pressure that you're applying when you use your tortillons and the direction. So, think about the direction that you are um, applying your pencil marks and your tortillon marks, because those are important because they help shape and form whatever it is that you are drawing.